good day, brew, baby? What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy, back on Hometown Commander. We're back for another episode of Millsy Brews, show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list on the commander in front of us on my quest to out-brew my favorite Magic channel. I don't think I've ever gotten an idea for a deck in this way before, so I wanted to be honest right off the jump. I think it's pretty well agreed that a lot of decks are what most people consider to be just inspired by EDHREC, right? We all use EDHREC as a platform, and it gives us the cards we should play, and we all seem to be okay with it. But the deck we have in front of us was actually inspired by a YouTube show, Shuffle Up and Play, that the professor does. And this deck was actually piloted by one of the people on that show. Now, this is my own version of this deck. I did not copy and paste their deck list. I did use it for some of the inspiration behind specifically the commander and maybe some of the signpost cards in the deck. But I really took this and made it my own because I loved the concept, and I didn't expect to like this concept off the jump. But I realized really quickly that maybe I just would do some things differently. I would approach some things differently. And so I wanted to do this, wanted to have fun with the deck list. So if you're interested in seeing that episode, the actual deck where the show where this deck was inspired from, I'm gonna put a link to that episode in the description because I want to be honest about where the idea came from. But again, this is my original version of this deck. It is not a copy paste, and I hope that you enjoy what we have. But the deck we have today is the War Doctor. The War Doctor and his companion here, or the companion chosen for this episode, will be Ryan Sinclair, who is the 13th Doctor's companion. But we have a really cool Boros deck coming here. And I just want to read through the commanders, and maybe you'll start to understand what we're trying to do. So the War Doctor says, whenever you put one or more permanents phase out, and whenever one or more other cards are put into exile from anywhere, we put a time counter on the War Doctor. And it says, whenever the War Doctor attacks, it deals damage equal to the number of time counters on it to any target. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, we exile it instead. And then Ryan's ability says whenever it attacks, we exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a non-land card. We can cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost if it's a spell with mana value less than equal to Ryan's power, but the exiled card's not cast this way on the bottom of the library in the random order and has Doctor's Companion, so it's allowed to be the War Doctor's Companion. This is an interesting idea that I really hadn't thought about at first. There's a lot of cards, especially in red, that exile things off the top of your deck unless you do things with them that accumulates time counters. And the War Doctor turns sideways and just domes someone for a ton of damage, essentially it's any target. I think this is such an interesting idea for a deck because the time counters are actually easy to put back on the War Doctor. We have things like the Ozolith that will just put the counters back onto him. But I think this is cool because this is in Boros. This allows us to just have a ton of fun with these abilities and have a good time. It's also cool because it allows me to play some red cards that I really love and some white cards that are from the new set that are really interesting. So my hope is that you'll sit in with me here and start to understand what the deck is all about. Mana base get to take advantage of a couple of the red-white lands that just got reprinted in the new Commander Doctor Who Precon, Sundown Pass and Sunbaked Canyon both got that reprint, making them a little bit more attainable as far as price-wise. Fear Comes Snarl got a reprint in that. Battle Forge and Clue Shot for Cheap just got those reprints in the Lord of the Rings deck, so they're pretty cheap. And Plaza Heroes feels like a really great idea here, where we have two legendary creatures being our commanders that we really care about and may want to protect if necessary. But as we get in the enchantments, we'll start to see where we're basing all of our synergies around our commanders. So if you're a fan of a deck that doesn't rely too much on your commander, this deck is not going to be for you. All will be one, a 5-mana enchantment says whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, all will be one deals that much damage to target opponent, creature an opponent controls, or planeswalker an opponent controls. All will be one feels perfect for this deck. The more time counters we put on the War Doctor, the more we're hurting our opponents or creatures they control. It feels perfect. It's exactly what we're trying to do, and it pays off exactly what we're trying to do. Kraken Time has Vanishing 3, so it enters the battlefield with 3 time counters on it. In the beginning of our upkeep, we remove one. If the last time is removed, we sacrifice it. But it says when it enters the battlefield in the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, exile target creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So 3 turns of taking things off of the battlefield, potentially lead the way for great attacks. The War Doctor, take things out of our opponents that we don't want them, we obviously don't want to deal with. But again, it's a cool card. We're not playing with as much time channels we were playing with on yesterday's card, but what I like about the Kraken Time is it's just going to help us for a couple turns, put more counters on the War Doctor, and hopefully lead the way. Well, the War Doctor is dealing damage, so might as well use Fire Emancipation or some way to double or triple that damage. Now, the only downside of the War Doctor's ability is him dealing the damage with his ability isn't considered commander damage, but that's fine because we're going to intend to just take players out. We don't particularly care that it's commander damage or not. We're just trying to take them out of the game. We're trying to deal that damage anyway. And Fire Emancipation is going to help. Whenever a source we control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. So the War Doctor should ideally start hitting harder and harder and harder. 4 knocks. At the beginning of each pre-combat main phase, we draw a card, and then Vanishing 4, so each turn loses that counter, and at the 4th one, we lose it. Again, great way to get some card draw every turn. Help us out along the way. Grasp of Fate. When it comes in, we exile up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls until it leaves the battlefield. So this will get us 3 triggers with up to 3 triggers with the War Doctor on exiling permanents, and then they stay out until this leaves the battlefield. So again, removal and feeding into our commander. Tavern Brawler says commanders you control have at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. This creature gets +X/+0 till end of turn, where X is that card's mana value. You can play that card this turn. This is cool because this is probably more for Ryan than it is for the War Doctor, because then Ryan can get us that spell cast off the top of our deck with its ability and see more cards in order to put counters on the War Doctor. Day of the Doctor, of course, the only episode that we really saw the War Doctor in. We exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a legendary card. You can play that card for as long as the Day of the Doctor remains on the battlefield and put the rest of the exile cards on the bottom. So this is going to help potentially get some counters on the War Doctor as we churn through our deck. And then on the 4, we choose up to 3 Doctors. You may exile all other creatures. If you do, the Day of the Doctor deals 13 damage to you. But in all reality, we really just want to flip things off the top of our deck, get a bunch of counters on the War Doctor, and hit the game going. And this was a card that did the player in that game a lot of good as they moved towards the mid-game and trying to get counters onto the War Doctor. And then Valakut Exploration. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, we exile the top card of our library. We can play that card for as long as it remains exiled. And at the end of the turn, if there are anything exiled with it, we put it into the graveyard and deal that much damage to each opponent. Again, the exile puts the counters on the War Doctor, and the damage gets dealt. So you can start to see this whole concept is starting to wrap around. We're trying to do everything we can to make our commander work and have fun along the way. And again, this is just not a concept I had thought about, but the more I started putting this deck together, the more I realized we can play some really fun cards that help us do this. Getting into our artifacts, start with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, just from Wilds of Eldraine. It says you can spend mana that were any mana to activate abilities of creatures you control. We don't have a ton of them, but good to know. Creatures you control with a +1/+1 counter on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which is a very interesting ability. We need to keep that in mind. It says tap, exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a counter on target creature control. This is just interesting, but it's mainly in here because it exiles a card each turn, which puts a counter on the War Doctor, hopefully each turn. But again, if we exile creatures, then we have the abilities of activate abilities of all creatures exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And that could be good depending on what we're playing into. Arcane Signet for some mana. Basilisk Collar was one of the first cards I thought of when I looked at the War Doctor. The War Doctor deals damage to another target, meaning Basilisk Collar will gain us the life, as well as because it gives it Death Touch, even if it deals 1 damage to a creature, it will kill that creature. Basilisk Collar is great. I love this card, and it feels great to play it in a deck where it matters. Boros Signet for some mana, Commander Spheres for some mana, Felwar Stone for some mana. We're playing both the Laser Screwdriver and the Sonic Screwdriver, which we talked about yesterday in our Time Whammy deck. Both of them are 3 mana rocks that tap for a mana, but they differ in that the Laser Screwdriver taps a target artifact for 1, surveils 1 for 2, and goads for 3, whereas the Sonic Screwdriver untaps an artifact for 1, scries 1 for 2, and the target creature can't be blocked this turn for 3, and that feels perfect for the War Doctor. Make him unblockable, hit that attack, and dome someone for all of that damage. Lightning Greaves to protect the War Doctor or Ryan, depending on which we need to protect. The Mind Stone. Mind Stone getting us a mana, and then of course sacking to draw a card is important. That's what also the Commander Sphere does as well. It allows us to sack to get another card. Riversong's Diary seems like an interesting card for this deck. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard as it resolves. So that should get us a counter for the War Doctor. But in the beginning of our upkeep, there are 4 more cards exiled with it. You choose one of them at random, and we may cast it without paying its mana cost. What I like is that it's a may, so if we pick into a board wipe and we don't want to wipe, we don't have to. But again, every time someone plays an instant sorcery, gets exiled, and hopefully that's adding counters to the War Doctor. Robe of Stars, perfect protection for the War Doctor. Quick creature gets +1/+3, and then for 2 mana you can phase it out and protect it. Or we can protect it or Ryan Sinclair, again, depending on what situation we're in. But again, piece of protection for our commander, and our commander is the most important, or the War Doctor is the most important thing, as it's what's dealing a lot of the damage. Rotating Fireplace. Whenever it enters the battlefield, Nightfall's tap with the time counter on it. We can add an amount of colors equal to the number of time counters on it. For 4 mana, we can time travel only as a sorcery. This is cool because we can add counters to the War Doctor, and we can keep our vanishing stuff going if we get to this access to this. If not, I like it because it just adds counters to the War Doctor. Soul Ring, of course. The TARDIS, of course, included in all of the decks, and it just feels right to play it. Whenever it attacks, if you control a Time Lord, the next spell you cast this turn has Cascade, and you may Planeswalk. There was an interesting world where if we attack with Ryan Sinclair, the War Doctor, and the TARDIS, we could put this on the stack first, making the next spell we cast this turn have Cascade, then do Ryan's ability, exiling from the top until we hit a card we can cast, and then cascading, exiling more cards and putting more counters on the the War Doctor before its ability goes off. At least that's my understanding of the way the stack would work, but still that would be pretty darn cool. Talisman of Conviction and Thought Vessel for a little bit of mana. Thought Vessel gives us that unlimited hand size. The Ozolith is one of our important cards in the deck, because anytime a creature we control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, we put those counters on the Ozolith, and then beginning of the combat on our turn, we can move those counters to a creature. So if the War Doctor ever gets removed, we put its time counters onto the Ozolith, and then it can move them back at the start of combat and make sure that it hits in for that damage. Unlicensed Hearse just seems interesting. 2 mana to come town, tap to exile 2 cards from up to a single graveyard. Its prime tap is equal to the number of lands or cards exiled with it. But again, we're hitting to a turn, which potentially will give us counters. Will give us a counter for the War Doctor. I realize it said 1 or more, but still, that's pretty darn cool, and it will allow us to get a big threat at some point as we're doing that. And then Wand of Wonder just seemed fun. 4 mana, roll a d20. Each opponent exiles cards on the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery and shuffles the rest of their library. We can cast up to X instant or sorceries from among them without paying their mana cost. 1 to 9 is 1, 10 to 19 is 2, and X is 3. Again, each opponent exiling should be its own separate trigger for the War Doctor, putting counters on it, and again, potentially just getting some of our opponent's value with it. As far as our instance goes, Boros Charm for some protection, where we give our commander double strike if we can potentially knock somebody out in combat. Calamity's Wake seems interesting, exiling all graveyards and players can't cast non-creature spells this turn, and we exile it. Could get us some counters with the War Doctor if need be. Clever Concealment to protect the board. It has Convoke, so we can tap our creatures to help pay for it, and just all of our non-land permanents phase out. Again, we need a way to protect the War Doctor, because obviously it's the linchpin of our whole strategy, and we need to keep it alive. Delayed Blast Fireball seems a card like we want to cast from exile if we can, but we don't mind. We don't mind otherwise, because it's a half-decent card. So if we don't cast from exile, it's 2 damage to each opponent and each creature. And then if we do cast it from exile, it's 5 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. So obviously we want to try to foretell it if we can, and then cast it, or try to get it off the top with something like Ryan Sinclair. If we can get it off the top with Ryan Sinclair, it does that 5 automatically for only 3 mana, which makes it even better. Everybody Lives from the Doctor Who Precons just seems like an interesting card. Maybe I'm rating this one a little bit too highly because of what the ability says, but I think it's worth trying. All creatures gain hexproof and indestructible till end of turn. Players gain hexproof until end of turn. Players can't lose life this turn, and players can't lose or win the game this turn. Just seems like an interesting card, a way to protect our board and protect things if need be, and help us stay alive if that ends up being coming. The fact that players can't lose life this turn will stop somebody from winning the game. And so hopefully that is the case. Exile is the imperfect. Exile target non-land permanent. Its controller incubates X, marks as its mana value. Here's a piece of removal that hits literally any non-land permanent, and then we get hopefully, and then of course we get the counter with the War Doctor because something was exiled. The Commander Beacons brought us Gallifrey Falls, no more. Very interesting split card. Gallifrey Falls deals 4 damage to each creature, and if a creature was dealt damage this way, it exiles it instead. The War Doctor is just above that fort at 5 toughness, so it should keep it alive, which is cool. And then no more to any number of target creatures we control phase out. So it's either hopefully a one-sided board wipe on one side, or a piece of protection on the other side. And of course, reference to the 50th anniversary special where we see the War Doctor and the painting. And then we're playing Path to Exile and Swords for just a little bit of removal. Getting up into the sorceries, I have been trying my best not to include these cards yet, just because they're not officially released yet. But I figured, man, if there was any deck for us to include it in, it's going to be this one. We're looking at Call Forth the Tempest. This is from the Lord of the Rings scene boxes that are coming out in a month or so's time. But I felt like if there's any place to play this, it's in this deck. An 8 mana double cascade spell. It says it deals damage to each creature your opponents control equal to the total mana value of other spells you've cast this turn. So for 8 mana, we cascade twice. Those hopefully are going to put some cool damage or some cool counters onto the War Doctor, get him stacked up with counters so he can start dealing damage, and then wipe the board for Ryan and the War Doctor to hit in, or any of our other things to hit in. Ensnared by the Morrow is a really fun card, and this is a card I can't wait to try elsewhere, but it says each opponent faces a villainous choice, so each opponent has to pick one or the other. They exile cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card, then we can cast it without paying its mana cost. Or that player exiles the top 4 cards from their library, and Ensnared by the Morrow deals damage equal to the total mana value of those cards to that player. This is probably going to be a tough choice for some players. Those cards don't go back, so if they pick the first option, they could potentially lose a lot of things. If they pick the second option, they just have to hope they don't have a ton of high mana value cards in their deck. But I like this card. I think it's worth the 4 mana, and I can't wait to jam this into another deck. Faithless Looting for a little bit of draw, Farewell for some removal, and like I said in the video yesterday, very thematic Doctor Who card in Farewell with David Tennant saying he doesn't want to go. But again, we need some board wipes, and Farewell is a great board wipe at that. Now, if we do say exile our artifacts, enchantments, and graveyards, this would potentially put counters onto the War Doctor. Of course, if we choose not to exile all creatures. If the War Doctor's out, but if the War Doctor isn't out, we don't want to do this and get rid of all creatures. But again, just goes to show you there is still value in it, even if you don't choose the creatures. Into the Time Vortex seems kind of fun. 5 mana cascade spell with rebound. So we would exile things and cast a spell, which will put counters onto the War Doctor. And then at the beginning of the next upkeep, we do it again, hopefully putting more counters on. Jessica's Will, Commander staple in red in its own right, gives us 2 options. We can add red for each card in target opponent's hand, or exile the top 3 and we can play them this turn. And of course, if we have the War Doctor or Orion, we can do both. But again, we want the War Doctor so we can get the mana and exile those cards and get the counters. We're playing Light Up the Stage, Reckless Impulse, and Rob the Archives, all to exile the top 2 cards of our library and play them until the end of our next turn. And Light Up Stage, we can pay for only 1 red if we dealt damage to an opponent. Reckless Impulse and Rob the Archives don't have that, but the cool part about Rob the Archives is if we have a 1-mana creature we get sacrificed, we can actually copy it and exile more. Relentless Assault and Seize the Day for a little bit of extra combats. Again, the more the War Doctor attacks, the more damage it will deal, and that will help us out in bringing the game to a close. And then the Wedding of River Song, we draw 2 and exile a non-land card from our hand with time counters unequal to its mana value. Opponent does the same, and cards exile this way that don't have suspense. We're getting 2 counters from the War Doctor for that, and then we time travel. Again, a great card, puts counters on the War Doctor and lets us get something out of our hand to potentially get for cheaper once the time counters go on it. All right, well, we talked about spells, we talked about enchantments, we talked about artifacts. Let's get to the creatures, because there's some really interesting creatures in the deck. A couple really important ones and a couple really fun ones. Bell Borka, Spectral Sergeant from Commander Legends. It is a legendary spirit shoulder. It says, note the current mana cost of each card as it's put into exile. Its power is equal to the greatest number noted for it this turn. Beginning of your upkeep, we exile the top card of our library we can play at this turn, which will put a counter, hopefully, on the War Doctor. Clar Oswald, 6 mana, comes down and it says, if a triggered ability of a doctor you control triggers, it triggers an additional time, doubling up on the War Doctor's attack trigger, which is going to hurt. Dinosaurs on a spaceship is in here for that cheap suspend. We get it on suspend and then get some tokens every time a counter gets removed from it, and then eventually it comes down as a big 7/7 with trample. Again, just a body to have, get the tokens as the time counters come off of it, get the counter on the War Doctor when we suspend it, and just enjoy the time that we have with dinosaurs on a spaceship until it eventually comes down. Atali, Primal Storm, again, just makes a ton of sense. When it attacks, each player exiles the top of their library, so that's going to automatically put 4 counters on the War Doctor, and then you may cast any number of spells from among them without paying their mana cost. So again, can potentially give us some benefit and counters on top of the War Doctor. Karlach, Fury of Avernus, every time we attack, if it's the first combat phase, we untap all creatures, and there's a additional combat phase, and they gain first strike until end of turn. So that's cool, because then the War Doctor could potentially be a little bit harder to get in combat. And again, we get another combat where we can attack again and use his ability. Lae'zel, Blacketh's Champion, whenever we put one or more counters on a creature, planeswalker, controller, ourself, we put that many +1. So this is cool because this will put that many more time counters onto the War Doctor, and that will help him, of course, in the long run, get that higher stack of TAM counters to deal to our opponents. Lelia, the Blade Reforged. When it attacks, we exile the top card, and we can play that card this turn, again, putting a counter on the War Doctor, but it also says whenever you exile one or more cards from your library or graveyard, you put a counter on Lelia. So Lelia will also grow as well. So it becomes another card in our deck that grows as we're exiling these things. Lion Sash. We can exile a target card from a graveyard for 1 white mana. If it was a permanent, we put a counter on Lion Sash. And then Lion Sash gets +1/+1 for each counter on it, or we can attach it to something, and the thing it's attached to gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. Again, this feels great onto the War Doctor to give it a little bit of a buff, as well as a way to just be constantly exiling something, and that is at instant speed, so that does help us as well. Magmatic Channeler, as long as there's 4 more instant sorceries in your graveyard, it gets +3/+1, bringing itself up to a 4/4. Or we just pay 1, or tap it, pitch a card to exile the top 2 cards of our library and choose one we can play at this turn, but that will put counters on the War Doctor. Murag, Fury of Akum, is a way to potentially help us end the game, giving us extra combats whenever a land comes into the battlefield under our control. If it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. Being in that combat, untap all creatures control. So the way with what you want to do with Murag is attack with it out. Each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each time it attacked, which will buff the board. Then in our main 2, we're going to play the land. Murag gives us another combat, untap everything, and get to swinging again. And then, of course, now they're even bigger at +2/+0 in that second combat. So Murag is great. It's a great body in its own right, and it will potentially help us end the game a little bit quicker with the War Doctor, in that we can get in multiple attacks. Plargon Asari was a card I thought about because this seems kind of interesting. At the beginning of our upkeep, each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. An opponent chooses a non-land card exiled this way. You may cast up to 2 spells from among the others without paying their mana cost. So we're going to get 4 tokens on the War Doctor because everyone's exiling at least 1 card, but then it could be more depending on how many get exiled. And we just potentially get something out of it. This card seems really cool. It's 5 mana. It's a decent body in itself, and it'll probably end up getting us lots of tokens out of the War Doctor, or counters into the War Doctor. Urabrask, Heretic Praetor. Beginning of your upkeep, we exile the top card, and we can play it this turn, getting us a counter on the War Doctor, hopefully. And then for our opponent, they have the same effect, hopefully getting the War Doctor a counter on everyone's turn. So, and then it's a 5/5 body with haste and not a bad attacker in its own right. We get a Wild Magic Sorcerer whenever we cast our first spell from exile. Each turn, that spell has Cascade. Hopefully this is going to work out with Orion's ability, but it also can work with a bunch of these other things we have that are casting spells, or things that are exiling things that we can cast. So those will have Cascade with Wild Magic Sorcerer for the first time. And then Yasmin Khan, tap Exile the top card of our library, and we could, until the end of our next end step, we could play it. Kind of an interesting card. Probably the one of the creatures I'm the least excited about, because it's only once per turn. Maybe we bring this out for something else. But again, every deck has to start somewhere, and I think Yasmin Khan isn't a bad way to get some recurring exile if we need it. And then Chandra, Torch of Defiance, a 4-mana Planeswalker that the +1 says exile the top card. You may cast that card if we want to. If we don't, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So this is a way to get a counter on the War Doctor and spread some damage. +1 to add 2 red, -3 to deal 4 damage to our creature, and -7 says whenever you cast a spell, it deals 5 damage to any target. Again, a great one because the +1, if we don't mind losing that card, will deal 2 damage to each opponent and get a counter on the Doctor. Or we can just cast that card. We lose out on the damage, but we still get the counter on the Doctor. So let me know, what do you guys think of the War Doctor and Ryan Sinclair down in the comments? Again, shout out to Shuffle Up and Play. This is a deck that seemed really cool, and I will be testing this one out with the play group. I'm intrigued to see if it does what I want it to do, if this is a deck that might be fun for me to try out. I haven't played a Boros deck in a long time, so it might be fun to give this one a go. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.